1 Timothy chapter 3, this is one of the main purposes of Paul writing this book, is this chapter. This is what he's trying to do.
And remember, the context is he's writing to Timothy, instructing him, because this is his main disciple, his main mentee.
Yeah.
He is the mentor to Timothy.
That's correct. It says, this is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? A church leader must not be a new believer, because he might become proud and the devil would cause him to fall. Also, people outside the church must speak well of him so that he will not be disgraced and fall into the devil's trap. In the same way, deacons must be well respected and have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers or dishonest with money. They must be committed to the mystery of the faith now revealed and must live with a clear conscience. Before they are appointed as deacons, let them be closely examined. If they pass the test, then let them serve as deacons. In the same way, their wives must be respected and must not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. A deacon must be faithful to his wife, and he must manage his children and household well. Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and will have increased confidence in their faith in Christ Jesus. I'm writing these things to you now, even though I hope to be with you soon, so that if I am delayed, you will know how people must conduct themselves in the household of God. This is the church of the living God, which is the pillar and foundation of the truth. Without question, this is the great mystery of our faith. Christ was revealed in a human body and vindicated by the Spirit. He was seen by angels and announced to the nations. He was believed in throughout the world and taken to heaven in glory.
Bada boom, bada bing.
Yeah.
So Timothy is receiving instruction from Paul, his mentor, and he's talking about being a church leader. He's talking about deacons. Now, I know that you teach this in our Next Steps classes, so you know the Greek words of the word deacon and pastor.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You want to give us some insight about that?
Yeah. So first of all, it says if someone aspires to be a church leader, the Greek there is what is typically translated as bishop, right? Or it means overseer. So there's three words: presbyteros, episkopos, and poimen. The word deacon is diakonos, so that one I think it just means servant. Poimen is pastor. That means shepherd, is what that means. Episkopos and presbyteros reference both the bishop, that's the overseer, the one who has responsibility for the organization of the church, and then the other is translated as elder, and it's all about having like spiritual and social and emotional and intellectual authority. Right, an advisor, an elder. You know, the idea would be that they would be more mature than the ones that are not yet elders. That's kind of the concept there. And so those are the three functions. But what's amazing is, oftentimes in the Bible, it uses all three words to reference the same group of leaders. So some are gifted as overseers. They're more leader type organizational leaders. Some are more advisory teacher types, counselors and caregivers. All of them are supposed to be shepherds, you know, caring for the flock of God. That's how that works. So this is the passage where he says, if someone aspires to be a bishop, an overseer, you know, the primary leader of the church, they desire an honorable position. I just want to say this. It's reasonable for you to desire, if you want to be a bishop, an overseer, it's reasonable to desire that role. It's not wrong to aspire to that if God's calling you to it, right? That's one. So if they desire it, and he says that's a good thing. And then he begins to unpack, what does that look like? What does that person look like? Has to be a person whose a life is above reproach, faithful to his wife, exercise self-control, live wisely, have a good reputation, enjoy having guests. It's hospitality. He has to be able to teach. He can't be, you know, and then talks about some of the behaviors to avoid: being a heavy drinker, violent, all those kinds of things, not quarrelsome, a gentle person. So he's really saying, when you're looking for a primary leader, or a primary group of leaders, look for people like this.
Yeah, and it's really great. To be a church, it says in my notes, to be a church leader, is a heavy responsibility because the church belongs to the living God. This term is used in this verse and sometimes translated as elder. It can refer to a pastor, elder, or bishop, just as you just said, or presiding overseer. Interestingly, elder and pastor are synonymous, not names for separate offices. Today often has a separate meaning, describing someone like a member of a board of advisors. What's so interesting is that I often say this too. My title is pastor, but the gift of pastor in Ephesians 4 talks about the caring gift or the nurturing gift, and that's one of my lowest on the list. But it's amazing how we all have that title, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're all called pastor, and yet it's like, okay, really apostles are really the ones who are gifted with leadership in terms of the spiritual God-given gifts, right? But I think it's great how he lists everything out, and I think that this is a great list that we use right in our bylaws.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So a lot of churches use this passage in our bylaws to say, do you live wisely? Does this person emote these things in their lives? In fact, we're going through a process right now where we're bringing on possibly another elder to Heritage Church.
Right.
And this is a lot of what governs our choices.
It's the filter. One of the things I like to say is let's take out of this passage, let's take out everything that has to do with leadership. And let's just read, how about instead if he said, all Christians should be this way?
Sure.
All Christians should be a person whose life is above reproach, be faithful to their wife, exercise self-control, live wisely, have a good reputation, be hospitable, be able to teach, not be a heavy drinker or be violent. All Christians should be gentle and not quarrelsome and not love money. We need to manage our own home well, right? We shouldn't be immature in our faith. That way we don't become proud. Others outside the church should speak well of us so that we don't fall into the devil's trap, right? So these are really exceptional comments or statements about what a Christian leader should be, but he's not saying that they should be anything that all the other Christians shouldn't be aspiring to.
Right.
Basically what he's saying is Christian leaders should be the most mature among us spiritually.
Right.
They should be, and maturity is measured both by their knowledge and by their lifestyle. And so there is a certain amount of substance to the lifestyle of a Christian, and you can determine what's going on the inside of a Christian by how they're living on the outside. And so he's saying, listen, they should be living on the outside like a very mature Christian, and then we're going to move them into leadership that way. That's how the church determines that they should be leading, is they're leading as mature Christians.
And I would say the only difference between the average Christian and somebody who's in a position of leadership at the church is that if you violate one of these things in a really, really massive way, as a regular Christian, we lose influence.
Right.
And we lose opportunity, and we lose further in the kingdom of God.
That's right.
As a leader, we lose positions.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a disqualification.
Right. Which is reasonable, because when we get to the book of Hebrews, it talks about that we're going to stand before God, church leaders are going to stand before God and give a double account for how we led the church, how we led the people, right? There's a higher responsibility for church leaders, but every Christian should be living this lifestyle. We should be able to look out across our church and see many, many, many people that are just about ready to be qualified to step into leadership. This is, I think, this is the goal. If you're trying to figure out what's the target for me as a Christian, it might not be to be a primary leader of the church, but it should be to have that kind of lifestyle, right? That's the bullseye of what it means to be living like a Christian. Right. Is these descriptions for both the overseers and the deacons. And I love how it says, it's so amusing to me. He must enjoy having guests in his home. Yeah. It's like what? What do you mean you must enjoy having guests in your home? Yeah. It's like, I don't like having people in my home, and then, the Greek word must be hospitable. Right. Yeah. So sometimes I'm the same way. I think you and I are very similar. My home is kind of my castle. It's not uncommon. I just pull the shades. I don't want anybody, I don't want to see anybody when I'm home, because that's my refuge. Right. But I love to have people over and barbecue and fix lunch for people and stuff like that. We'll do a lot at the office or whatever. So I love to be hospitable,
Right.
And I think that so the word hospitality there is just translated in this instance as you have to enjoy having people in your home, because they didn't have church buildings or any other gathering spaces. It was just in their homes back then. So
Yeah, and I also want to point out where it says he must not be a heavy drinker. He didn't say you must not drink at all. In the Greek, it says must not drink too much wine. And you know what I've always thought is a sort of a debate among Christians where you talk about like the abuse of something is where the sin lies. So like it's clearly black and white. You do not get drunk. Like it's listed as a sin.
Yeah, there's no question.
Don't get drunk with wine.
it's a sin to be drunk.
It's not a sin to eat, but it's a sin to abuse eating and be obese.
Gluttony.
Yeah, gluttony.
Right.
I've always viewed it that way. Like I personally don't believe it's a sin to gamble. I believe it's a sin to be unwise with your finances. If you were to spend a nickel on something and say, "Woo-hoo-hoo,"
Well,
versus
it's like so it doesn't say it's a sin to gamble. It just says a fool and his money are soon parted.
right,
right. It's the same thing. Is it a sin? Are you going to go to hell for smoking?
Right.
Well, no. You're just going to smell like you've been there. Right.
So and probably get there quicker.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So there's a lot of those things. It's things in moderation is really the issue here.
Right.
The question I would say is how drunk is drunk? That would be always the question in that passage. And so really what you'll find is the more mature a Christian becomes, oftentimes the less they need or desire the things that cloud their judgment and cloud their decision making.
Well, I tell you what, I was actually who was it that I just saw? Oh, come on, somebody so famous. It's like a comedian. And he goes, I have never drank a drop in my life. He said, I have never smoked a cigarette. He goes, I have never gambled. He went down this list, and he's this big Hollywood guy.
Yeah.
And they said, what? And then he said something else that was just totally unusual.
Yeah.
It was something like, I've never eaten a dessert or something crazy.
Wow, yeah.
And they said, what? And he goes, I just determined a long time ago that I'm just better off without those things.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's just, hey man.
It's the illustration of driving on a mountain road, right? And you've got a 1,000-foot cliff on one side. You got the mountain tied up on the other side. And if you have, your newborn baby in your car, which is it? Are you a better driver because you can drive within an inch and a half of the edge of the cliff?
Right.
Or are you a better driver because you stay, an inch and a half away from the edge of the mountain brushing up against your car to keep your baby as far from the cliff as possible? It's this precious cargo that causes you to avoid the edge. And I think that if we can understand the precious cargo of who we are in Christ and the mission he has for us, the further from the edge we would stay.
Which would be under the comment, live wisely.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
So live wisely is actually a value of our staff.
One of our staff.
One of our staff values. Where we cover the values and we say live wisely. So the wiser you are, the less you're going to have of all of that.
So let me end with this. Verse 2 says, so a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. That word above reproach, it kind of, some people would say, well, that means that you have to, just have this perfect reputation. What it's saying there, that the actual Greek word means without a handle.
Without a handle, something to grip.
So a lot of times lost people or, immature people are looking for something to grab a hold of and go, aha, gotcha. And so that really falls into that live wisely. So there's things I'm permitted to do that aren't sinful, but if I do them, the world can go, Christians don't do that. And then you're not living wisely, and it gives them a handle. And so there's a lot of things that I have to choose to self-regulate in order to avoid having those handles that people grab a hold of.
Well, Paul says all things are lawful, not everything's beneficial.
That's right.
Right? Not everything's expedient. Not everything's wise.
That's correct.
Right? So the idea that Paul is calling church leaders to a standard, again, this is every Christian. The only difference is, again, if you're a church leader and you violate these things in a big way, you violate the office. Yeah, there's a consequence.
But this is the goal for all of us.
Right.
All of us, this is the lifestyle that God's calling us to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a really good place to end, and we will see you next time on The Bible Guys.